Good evening, and welcome to Mid-Valley Bible Church's virtual prayer meeting for April 14th, 2021. My name is Doug Hornock, and I'm the pastor at Mid-Valley Bible Church. 60 years ago, A.W. Tozer was the pastor of a large Christian and Missionary Alliance church in Chicago. While there, he wrote a book that has since become a classic among Christians and has sold millions of copies. It's a book that remains very much in demand today. It's entitled simply, The Knowledge of the Holy. And in it, Tozer writes about the desperate need for the church to revise its concept of God due to a very distorted conception of Him. He wrote, "It is my opinion that the Christian conception of God current in these middle years of the 20th century is so decadent as to be utterly beneath the dignity of the Most High God, and actually to constitute for professed believers something amounting to moral calamity." Tozer goes on and says that the heaviest obligation lying upon the Christian church today is to purify and elevate her concept of God until it is once more worthy of Him. That, as I said, was written 60 years ago. And I would argue that things have only gotten worse since Tozer wrote them. Today we have a perception of God that is far from accurate. Today God is no longer reverenced and revered. We see Him as our buddy and our friend instead of the almighty God of the universe. And He's sort of viewed as a genie in a bottle that we can rub and get what we want, when we want, and need it. And that's sad. It would be difficult indeed to overestimate the importance of having an accurate and proper perspective of God. Charles Spurgeon, who was the greatest preacher of his day, said, "Nothing will so enlarge one's intellect, nothing so magnify the whole soul of man as a devout, earnest, continued investigation of the great subject of the deity. The most excellent study for expanding the soul is the science of Christ and Him crucified, and the knowledge of the Godhead in the glorious Trinity." And that's true. And so what I want to do for the next few weeks is I want us to talk about the various attributes of God. Because as both Tozer and Spurgeon have pointed out, nothing is more important than our understanding of God. We need to try to wrap, and it's almost an impossibility, our tiny brains around God. Now, why is that important? Well, I could easily give us a dozen reasons for it, but I want to just suggest 3 this evening. And the first is this: apart from God and a proper understanding of Him, you cannot have morality. If you want to know why things are so messed up in our world today, it's because we are ignorant of God. We have a warped and twisted perspective of God. God is the standard of morality, and He sets that standard for His people to follow. His laws proceed from His own character. God is holy, and He said that His people are to be holy. An additional reason for knowing who God is a wrong view of God is the sin of idolatry, which is what leads to countless other sins. Tozer writes, "Among the sins to which the human heart is prone, hardly any other is more hateful to God than idolatry. For idolatry is at bottom a libel on His character. The idolatrous heart assumes that God is other than He is. Let us beware lest we in our pride accept the erroneous notion that idolatry consists only in kneeling before visible objects of adoration, and that civilized peoples are therefore free from it. The essence, he writes, of idolatry is the entertainment of thoughts about God that are unworthy of him. In other words, thinking wrongly of God is idolatry, and it's demeaning to him because it always views God as being other and less than he truly is. Tozer adds, I believe there is scarcely an error in doctrine or a failure in applying Christian ethics that cannot be traced finally to imperfect and ignoble thoughts about God. Let me suggest third and finally, the reason for these devotionals is I believe that a study of the attributes of God will enhance and strengthen our prayer life. Knowing God's character, knowing who he is, not only instructs us about what we should pray for, which is what is in accordance with his character, but it also assures us that God is able and willing to answer our prayers. We're not just praying to anyone. We're praying to a God who, in keeping with his character, hears our prayers and is willing and able to answer them. And so my sincere hope is that each of us, as we gather together on these Wednesday evenings and talk about God's attributes, will join with Moses in saying, let me see thy glory. Let me see, God, who you really are, because there is no greater joy and privilege in life than to behold the glory of God. That's what we're going to be doing and enjoying through all eternity. And the glorious truth is that we can start right now. Now, to see his glory, we have to study his attributes. And as we do so, we dare not study them as a mere academic activity. These are the characteristics of God as a person. And the outcome of our times together should be that of Moses, that we will respond in worship and praise. And as we do so, we will then seek out others to know our God and his presence as well. And so with that reminder before us this evening, let's now go to prayer.